high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Nakanoaji. I head the programs here at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda. You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Winfred Mugambo. I'm the focal point person, Central Region, for the coalition.
So without wasting time, those who want to take a report, the executive director is going to read the statement. So you can state your thoughts. You'll read it. So, colleagues, I'm going to present this statement, but somewhere midway, I'll also invite my colleagues who are specialists in freedom of expression, like Madame Catherine Anite, specialists in women's rights, who represent also the women human rights defenders, to make their comments on the same statement. They'll read the same statement with specific reference to those thematic areas. So I'll start the statement. Human rights in peril as COVID-19 escalates in the face of 2021 elections. The National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders in Uganda expresses concern over the escalation of human rights violations across the first half of 2020, especially targeting human rights defenders in the country. On June 16, 2020, the Electoral Commission announced the resumption of electoral activities under a revised roadmap for 2021 general elections, and human rights defenders are often being caught between these bitter contests because of the critical role they play in elections. Colleagues, this election is unique as it comes in a period when we are faced with a health hazard, namely COVID-19, a dangerous pandemic that continues to ravage the globe in unprecedented ways. We salute the government that has done commendable well to safeguard Ugandans from the spread of the virus, in spite of an escalation on human rights violations. We invited you here as our tradition to address you on some patterns that need to be highlighted with regard to human rights, but specifically on how they impact the important work of human rights defenders. Human rights defenders and elections. The National Resistance Movement Party held its primaries on the 4th and 11th September, respectively, and close to 2,000 incidents of electoral violence have been reported in various police stations across Uganda. In a recent report by the National Election Watch Uganda, a local electoral observation network, several districts including Mbale, Sembabule, Kasanda, Adjumani, Kampala, Wakiso, Mityana, Sironko, Bundibujo, Hoima, Chiruhura, Kazo, Shema, Bushenyi, Koboko, Tororo, Busia, Kakumiro, and Iganga are emerging as electoral hotspots ahead of the 2021 general elections. The indiscriminate violence has not spared human rights defenders and affected the ability of these defenders or electoral observers to meaningfully undertake their work to observe elections. This does not depart much from our findings in the title Democracy on Trial in 2019, where we analyzed several incidents of human rights violations against human rights defenders in the past election, and emphasized that lack of accountability will encourage impunity for violence in electoral processes. I now want to present the highlights on attacks of human rights defenders. Between 20th and 22nd May 2020, two human rights defenders from Friends of Zoka, an environmental rights group based in Adjumani and with operations in Moyo districts, were threatened by the RDC Moyo, Mr. Bob William Labeja. The human rights defenders have been engaged in an investigation of illegal logging taking place in the sub-region, specifically in Metu sub-county in Moyo district. The threats to the lives of human rights defenders, namely Manzur William and John Unzima, have persisted to date by those state actors. On 4th September 2020, 8 land rights human rights defenders were arrested and detained in Kiryandongo on the instructions of the area district police commander known as Bakaleke Joseph. The 8 human rights defenders, namely Mwaula Fred, Ndahima Naramu, Kusima Samuel, Martin Munyansia, Martin Haweka, Wafula Amos, Muloni Wanjala, and Wantalemwa were arrested and detained without charge. This follows the rounding up and arrest of 7 lawyers who were investigating the circumstances surrounding the forceful eviction of over 35,000 people being disposed of their land by 3 multinationals, namely Agilis Partners, Great Season, and Kiryandongo Sugar Limited on 30th June 2020 by the anti-riot police. Targeted attacks continue unabated. In one of the most recent incidents, unknown assailants broke into the home of the renowned human rights lawyer and advocate, Mr. Nicholas Opio, on the night of 8 September 2020, and they targeted his communication gadgets such as a phone and a laptop. Human rights defenders' right to assembly has hugely been stifled in some cases under the guise of COVID-19 restrictions. Following the Bugoma forest takeover, activists initiated a Save Bugoma campaign. The group urged the parliament to use its oversight powers to investigate the actions of NEMA, Hoima Sugar Limited, and Ministry of Lands for issuing land titles in forest reserves, approving environmental and social impact assessment reports in disregarding of national laws and other illegal actions. On 10 September 2020, a letter surfaced written by the Inspector General of Police denying the activists the right to peaceful assembly and protest the takeover of Bugoma Forest by Hoima Sugar Limited. I'd now like to invite my sister, Catherine Anite, to present the statement with regard to press freedom and expression rights.
Thank you, Robert. And I now summarize the closing space and restrictive environment for the enjoyment of freedom of expression. Violations against journalists were reported. The report cited the Uganda Police Force and the Uganda Communications Commission as the lead violators of freedom of expression rights and journalistic freedoms in Uganda. In the recent Freedom of Expression Summit convened by Chapter 4 Uganda, civil rights advocates expressed concern about the use of vague minimum broadcasting standards in spite of press freedom and target individual journalists. On 26th of July 2020, Ugandan comedians Revisonto, journalist Masaja Mivule, and musician Kiwewa were arrested on allegations of promoting sectarianism and held beyond 48 hours without appearing before courts of law. Comedians fear regulations will destroy political satire and restrict speech and expression. The performers and the state regulations. On the 8th of September 2020, the Uganda Communications Commission issued a notice introducing annual fees for anyone making communication using digital platforms. This, according to various actors, sets a bad tone and is a continued affront on the freedom of expression. So we've seen the three regulations that have been emphasized. They do not meet the three-part test under international law and our constitutional standards in terms of restricting freedom of expression. So the laws are imprecise and vague, and they unnecessarily limit the enjoyment of freedom of expression and press freedom. So I'll now hand over to the women rights defenders.
Jane Francis Olim, the Executive Director of Women in Development. And the women human rights defenders have hugely been affected by the lockdown and the shift to digital working with the unprecedented COVID-19. And there was a huge spike in gender-based violence countrywide, and this hasn't spared women human rights defenders as well. And I want to add on to this that the usual intimidation and the unlawful arrests and detention have not stopped, and instead it's on the increase as the women human rights defenders do their work. And I think the freedom of speech, we can no longer speak freely on certain issues that we feel are wrong. We are saying that the freedom of speech is under attack in this context, and then we want to continue to speak against the surrounding violence and elections so that we can all realize a free and fair elections.
What the generator is trying to achieve is even killing the little. Yes, let's just project your voice.
So I repeat the whole thing?
Start from there.
Okay, I was saying as the women human rights defenders, it is getting harder every day for us to speak against a few issues like the violence that the country has witnessed and we are still witnessing, because we know that violence is one of the issues that violates the human rights, especially violence during elections. Now, a few of those things we can no longer speak. Our freedom of expression is under attack as a women human rights defenders. And then the movement from one place or the other. We can no longer move freely. We know there's the pandemic, but there is that abuse of our movements, and you can easily be arrested and you're moving for the right cause to defend the rights of Ugandans. So a few of these are the things I felt I should have spoken about.
So, Farida will address us on activities.
Thank you so much. Despite the many challenges that human rights defenders face, all hope is not lost, and there are some opportunities that we need to look to in order to open up the civic space. And one of the key opportunities is a national law on the protection of human rights defenders in Uganda. Since 2016, organizations like Defenders Protection Initiative, the National Coalition, Human Rights Defenders, Human Rights Center Uganda, National Coalition, Chapter 4, and many others have been heading a campaign, an advocacy campaign, to come up with a national law on the protection of human rights defenders in Uganda. And I would like to say that on June 9th, 2020, Honorable Leandro Komarket, the MP Gulu Municipality, the mover of the bill, had an opportunity to seek leave of Parliament to introduce the bill as a private member's bill in Parliament. This is a very important development for human rights defenders, and it gives us hope that if Parliament does its job and passes this law, we shall have enhanced our protection as human rights defenders. So we all need to support the passing of the National Human Rights Defenders Protection Bill. Then additionally, as we get into elections period, on 11th September 2020, the National Election Watch, which is NUU, a local election observer network, was launched to support efforts towards a citizen-centered electoral observation process. We welcome this latest development and all the efforts towards a free and fair and credible electoral process. And we urge all Ugandans to take part in this process and also support all ongoing initiatives. So we would like to call upon all Ugandans to know that it's our responsibility to take part in the promotion and protection of human rights in different roles, much as the primary responsibility lies with the state.
Thank you. I will now go to the conclusion with regard to what we are calling upon government and state actors to do. As my colleague said,
The responsibility to protect and promote human rights lies primarily on the state. And therefore, having said this, we want to recommend the following. 1, to the Uganda Police Force. We want to re-emphasize our call to the release on the findings of the office break-ins and prosecute perpetrators. Since 2016, many NGOs have had their offices broken into. Police have investigated, but they have never come out with conclusive reports. For you to get a conclusive report from the Uganda Police Force requires you to do 2 things. 1, to seek the authority of the Inspector General of Police. 2, to pay a fee of 90,000 per report. The National Coalition has fulfilled these 2 conditions, but we've never received any report from the Uganda Police Force. 2, we want to ask the police to stop the enforcement of Section 8 of the Public Order Management Act, pending determination by the Supreme Court where the matter has been laid. 3 is to end the brutality, arbitrary arrests, incommunicado detention, and attacks on journalists and human rights defenders who monitor and report on human rights issues during protests and in all situations. We urge the police to support private prosecution efforts by civil rights advocates where police officers are implicated. To the Parliament, as the legislative body, we wish to urge them to fast-track the Human Rights Defenders Bill to explicitly recognize the legitimate work of human rights defenders and provide them a protection mechanism. Review the vague provisions, including the minimum broadcasting standards in the Uganda Communications Act of 2013, and bring them in conformity with the 1995 Constitution. To the Electoral Commission as an electoral management body, we urge them to consolidate the current engagements with civil society organizations, especially in the framework of the new EU as domestic election observers. To the Uganda People's Defense Forces, to de-escalate employment of errant local defense units that have been implicated in human rights violations previously. Support private prosecution efforts by civil rights advocates where LDUs and other UPDF officers are implicated. To the Uganda Communications Commission, to stop regulatory overreach through the exploitation of vague provisions under the law, especially the Uganda Communications Act of 2013. My colleague will give us a Uganda version. Madam Sharon is ready to give you the Uganda version of this question in a summarized form. Thank you very much.
National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda. Era olwaleero tubayise wano nga twagala okutuukiriza okunyolwa kwaffe eri gavumenti ya Uganda okusinziira ku byonna ebibadde bigenda mu maaso ebikwata ku balwanizi b'eddembe nga bityoboola obulwanizi bw'eddembe lwabwe. Ebisinga obukulu bye twagala okutunulamu olwaleero kyetuyita Human Rights Defenders and Elections. Naddala ba Human Rights Defenders aba balwanira eddembe ly'abalwanizi b'eddembe ne elections oba okulonda obululu mu Uganda. Bwe tutunuulira ku primaries ezibadde zitakinga place mu Uganda, naddala primaries eza NRM ezakaggwa mu period eno okuva ku nga 4 ne 11 olwa September oba omwezi gwa 9 ogw'omwaka guno. Twalaba ebintu bingi ebyava mu kulonda kwa NRM primaries nga waliwo issues nyingi, incidents abantu bye bayogerako bye baleeta mu maaso ebisukka mu 20,000 complaints z'abantu nga balina okunyolwa eri ebintu byonna ebyali bibaddewo mu kulonda kuno kwa primaries mu districts ez'enjawulo, naddala nga mu districts ez'Embaale, Sembabule, Kasanda, Adjumani, Kampala, Wakiso, Mityana, Sironko, Budibujo, Hoima, Kiruhura, Kazo, Shema, Busheni, Koboko, bigamba bintu bingi byavaayo ebyali biraga okunyolwa kw'abantu naddala balwanira eddembe ly'abantu baali nga bayisiddwa bubi ng'ate eddembe lyabwe tebakkiriziganidwa nnyo okutuukiriza ebyo bye baali balina okutuukiriza mu mirimu gyabwe era tuleeta okunyolwa eri ebyabaawo okusinziira ku ba human rights defenders abalwanira eddembe lya Uganda n'abo abakwata ku elections. Bwe tutunuulira ku ebibaddewo ku balwanizi b'eddembe bya njawulo, waliwo abalwanizi b'eddembe abalwanirira eby'ettaka oba ebya environment naddala bwe tutunuulira mu district eya Zongo aba Friends of Zoka. Waliwo balwanizi baffe ab'eddembe nga Amanzuro William ne John Onzima abaali nga bayiganibwa olwa RDC nga atiisatiisa engeri gye baali bavaayo okwogeraku ebibi ebyali bikoleddwa ku environment oba ku byobuwanga mu kitundu kyabwe eyajumani. RDC ow'Emmoyo Mr. Bob William Labejja yavaayo okubeera ng'atulugumya eddembe lyabwe olw'ebyo bye baali bajjayo okwogera ku nsonga zaali ziri mu kitundu kyabwe ze baali boogerako ne babatiisatiisa nga RDC ayagala kubalemesa okukola emirimu gyabwe. Era tulaba abo abaali balwanira eddembe abo bakwata ku by'ettaka abalwanira ettaka ery'ekiryandongo bangi abaali batulugunyizibwa ne balwoyi abaali babakolako ne babatulugumya olw'ensonga nti balina ebintu bye baali batadde mu maaso okusinziira ku ettaka bye baali boogerako ery'ekiryandongo. Era tulaba nga tugenda mu maaso freedom of expression and rights bano abajournalists oba abanamawulire balina ensonga nyingi naddala mu situation eno eya COVID. Gavumenti ekoze nnyo bingi byetadde mu nkola era tugyebaza naye era mu kuteeka mu nkola ebintu by'enjawulo mubaddemu okunyigirizibwa kungi. Abamu tetubalaba naye owulira nga ow'amawulire omu baamukutte olw'ebintu byakolako oba bya reportinga byayogeddeko naye lwakuba tetutegeere tetulaba nnyo ebigenda mu maaso okiwulira eyo nti baamusibye baamutadde mu komera ate ne batamukkiriza okuvaayo ne yeeyogerako. Bwe tutunuulira bakomedian oba bano babadde bakola emizannyo mu Uganda ffenna tubamanyi nga babizonto gavumenti yavaayo nebasiba olw'ebyo bye baali bakola n'etabawana chance okuvaayo ne babeera nga beeyogerera ku bintu bye bagala okweyogerako n'eteekako etteeka ng'egamba nti byonna bye balina okuproducinga oba emizannyo gye balina okukola erina okubeera ng'eri approved before balina okufuna olukisa nga tebanaba kukola emizannyo gye balina okukola n'olaba nga okwo okunyigirizibwa kugenda okubalemesa okusobola okutuukiriza emirimu gyabwe nga tebasobola okweexpressinga bulungi oba okusobola okutuukiriza bye baagala okwogera nga batidde okusooka okufuna permission oba olukusa okuva mu Uganda Communications Commission. Bwe tutunuulira ensonga z'abakyala mu ggwanga lino abakyala banyigirizibwa nnyo naddala mu maka ensonga z'obutabanguko mu maka zeeyongedde ate nga abakyala babadde bakola ku nsonga zino nabo banyigirizibwa tebasobola kgenda mu maaso ne boogera ku bigenda mu maaso ku lwa lockdown ebaddewo ng'ensi yonna egaliddwawo entambula yaabwe tesobodde kuba nyangu byonna bibadde bizibu so nno bwe tutunuulira byonna ebitekinga place mu ggwanga bwe bigenda mu maaso mu ggwanga olaba nga n'abakyala bye bandibadde boogerako b'emirimu gyabwe gye bakolako okulwanirira eddembe lyabwe nalyo lifunyeemu obuzibuzibu naye nga tulaba nga waliwo emikisa oba opportunities ez'okusobola okwongerayo eddoboozi lyaffe okwogerera naddala nga waliwo etteeka ery'abalwanizi b'eddembe eriri mu parliament eryateekebwawo ku fulo ya parliament nti basobole okutunulirwa mu mirimu gyabwe gye bakola nga parliament ebawe netteeka libasoboseze okutuukiriza emirimu gyabwe so eryo etteeka likyali mu maaso tulindiridde bwe banaliisa abalwanizi b'eddembe nabo basobole okufuna obwogerera ne batuukiriza ebyabwe. Waliwo n'ekibiina ekipya ekigenda okukola ku nsonga za elections oba ez'okulonda kye bayitaga new youth kiri kyatandise wano mu Uganda nga 11 omwezi guno ogw'omwenda bakitongoza. Kigenda kuba kikola ku nsonga ez'okulonda oba ez'obululu. Kigenda kusobola kuyamba abalwanirizi b'eddembe bonna nabona bakwata ku by'obululu. So nno ki kye tuyita eri gavumenti Uganda okukola? Naddala Uganda Police Force tukoowoola eri poliisi yaffe eya Uganda okufulumya ripoota gye baakola ku bapoliisi abaali bayingira mu ma-offices z'ebitongole ne bazimenyawo. Twagala ripoota eyo efulumye kubanga obudde buyise nga tuyita poliisi okufulumya ripoota eyo, naye poliisi erudde okufulumya eyo ripoota. Tugyetaaga nga ripoota efulumye ate nga bonna baakola ebikolobolo ebibi twagala babaleete mu kooti bawoze omusango. Twagala ne Public Order Management Act Section 8 eya act eyo ekyali mu kooti esobole okubeera ng'etuukirizibwa bastopinge abapoliisi okwenforcinga eyo Public Section 8 eya Public Order Management Act ng'ate ekintu ensonga zikyali mu kooti tezinaba kumalizibwa. Twagala poliisi ekoma okubeera ng'etulugunya eddembe ly'abantu kubanga abantu bangi bakaabye olw'ebintu poliisi lwebayisizaamu. Ate paliyamenti yaffe tusaba eri omukyala akulira sipiika owa paliyamenti Honorable Rebecca Kadaga kutunula mu nsonga eza Human Rights Defenders Bill kakati gye twagala ebeere ng'eyisibwa paliyamenti ekwata ku nsonga za abo abalwanizi b'eddembe tusobole okubeera nga tutuukiriza ebyo bye tulina okukola ng'abalwanizi b'eddembe. Ate twagala batunule mu broadcasting, batunule standards ez'okutuukiriza amawulire boogere wamu ne Uganda Communications Commission balabe nga ebintu bye bateeka mu nkwaso aba Uganda Communications Commission ebitalina okubeera paliyamenti etuule wansi ebitunulemu abantu abareportinga oba bannamawulire basobole okuvaayo nabo babeere n'eddembe lyabwe eryogera. Aba Uganda People's Defence Forces naddala b'amagye tusaba mwongere okunyweza okulaba nga ba LDU abatulugunya abantu babaleeta nabo ne babawozesa olw'ebyo ebikolobero bye bakoze eri abantu ebitatuukiridde mu kifo ky'okubaleka ne bakola nga bwe baagala abo abakoze ebikolobero ebibi tubaleete before court basobole okuwoza emisango gyabwe. Era twongere okulaba nga nabo tubayigiriza basobole okutegeera eddembe ly'abantu n'okuprotectinga abantu. Ng'amaliriza eri Uganda Communications Commission oba ababakulira ab'amawulire twagala basobole okubeera nga bamalawo approaches ebintu byonna bye bakozesa okulaba nga balemesa abantu okusobola okutuukiriza emirimu gyabwe. Uganda Communications Commission batunule emirimu gyabwe engeri gye bagikolamu bagikole nga bwe balina ogikola okutuukiriza okusinziira ku the law ne human rights nga bwe yeetaagisa okuggyako okumala aganyigiriza abantu nga tebafolowinze etteeka kiki ebigamba. So byebyo bye tusaba gavumenti okutuukiriza n'otukolera ffe ng'abalwanizi b'eddembe ly'aba human rights defender.
We are going to take a few questions. Please try to direct them to person who wants to respond. We will take 5 at a time. 5 questions, then they will respond, and then 5 more.
Please feel free and ask questions.
Thank you so much. I'm Julius and I work with Smart Report TV. This goes to the director. We have seen many times human rights organizations deploying staff in different areas measuring elections. So meaning that it spends on those people to go and observe what's happening. So could you track down for us the expenditure you had last year in comparison with so far what you have spent this year on those people? Thank you.
Okay. In terms of expenditure?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bianca Malosias. I work with the Radio Mama. My question is, or my concern, would you want that law passed before this general election? Then, do you maybe have a collective force that will be deployed in different areas of Uganda maybe to rescue those that will be arrested ahead of this election. Thank you.
Thank you. Jingo.
Yes, my name is Jingo Francis. I work with NTV. Just wanted to find out, just clarity from what you said. You mentioned some names of human rights defenders who have been arrested, tortured. Currently, do you have some of those who are still under detention? And then two, is there any other action that you're going to take other than calling upon the government, calling upon the police and the security forces to stop the brutal acts? Are there other actions that you're going to take, possibly not illegal action against the government for these human rights abuses that have taken place?
Yeah, three more. Yes, Mr.
Thank you. I'm called Kenneth. I work with Radio 1. I wanted you to give us a scenario compared to what was transpiring towards the 2016 general election, what you're seeing now. What's the trajectory? What do you see? Do you see the situation getting better for human rights defenders, or is it getting worse? And if you can link up, what does this mean for an election process that we are going in?
All right, there's a gentleman.
My name is Abel Miru from the New Vision. I'd like to know when
Mr.
you
Mobiru.
call upon government to address, say, the violence that we witnessed in NRM primaries, what is it that you want NRM to do such that the violence we witnessed does not spill over to next year's election? What is it that you want to do safe for the perpetrators of those cases? What is it that should be done?
One more. Okay. One more? Okay. So I'll let the PD respond. And if any other panelists wants to compliment,
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll start with Mr. Mubiru's question, which has to do with the concerns. What do we want to see government do or NRM? For an election to be considered credible, free and fair, whether at a primary or at a national level, requires you to have what we call a credible register. What is a credible register? It means you have a document that records all your party members, clearly indicating their names and such that when they are going to vote, as you preferred that they should line up, that they are known to be in this book and their names are credible, and then you call them. And so what we want to see government do in terms of or the NRM as a party is to put into mechanisms or systems to ensure that their system is credible when it comes to primary elections. Credibility requires them to have a credible register. Two is to ensure that people observe peace, even if they disagree, that there should not be violence. The role of security officers should be to maintain law and order, as opposed to showing partisan sides or trying to support one candidate against another. So that is what. So in other words, can the party, the ruling party, address the concerns of its own members? Because the people complaining here mainly are its supporters or members who are saying so and so was supported or so and so was given an advantage in comparison to me. And of course, the statements by the chairperson of the party itself. To what extent does the chairperson of the party involve in the electoral affairs of the party? If you have an election commission of the party, let the chairperson of that electoral commission put up the guidance here. But when you start having contradicting, one says that we shall use the register, and another one says that anybody, as long as an NRM man lives in that village, can vote. Do you know everyone who is in your village? Not even the LC1, especially in urban areas, can identify who, unless you have that credible register that shows you. Mr. Ken Lukwago, can we give a scenario compared to the other general election? What is our take? What did we envisage? The violence we have observed or witnessed is violence coming from the major party, ruling party, that has resources, that has all the instruments of coercion, that it can deploy the police, it can deploy the army at its own will. Now, if they cannot control issues of violence, what will happen when the contestants are from the opposite side versus the ruling party? So what we intend, we see these things escalating unless timely interventions are made. And these timely interventions can only be made by the state that controls the instruments of coercion. The state controls the police, the state controls the army, the state controls its actors, whether they are public servants or not. And therefore, if they do not take up these measures, then we can see the situation getting out of hand. The buck stops with the state because it has the primary responsibility to protect and promote human rights in such a situation. Mr. Jingo Francis, yes, human rights defenders under attack. Are there still some under detention? Right now, I can't tell you because I don't have a team, but they could be, and some were released. We do not have figures as of this morning as we address you as the press that there are any human rights defenders. But normally we get reports when they are under detention. And what is the other action we intend to take as opposed to appealing to the police? Well, you know that we have what they call the Human Rights Enforcement Act of 2019, where individuals, as opposed to previous times, will be held personally liable. If a policeman or a member of the Uganda People's Defense is involved in violating the rights of citizens, then we can't have that person privately prosecuted. And that's why in our call to action, we're asking these law enforcement agencies to allow private prosecution of their members who are suspected to be involved in these human rights violations. To allow private prosecution outside the ambits of the Directorate of Public Prosecution. Can someone cause an action against these errant officers? Mr. Byamkama Lazarus, would we want this law passed? Yes. Mr. Byamkama, want this law, the Human Rights Defenders Bill, passed as early as possible so that human rights defenders enjoy their space to do their work. This law is meant, one, to legitimize the work of human rights defenders as provided under Article 38 of the Constitution. And once it is legitimized, we think or we hope state actors, errant state actors such as RDCs and some police officers will be able to understand that the work that human rights defenders such as journalists, such as women human rights defenders or any other actor working on civil political rights as we go into election, their rights are observed and are let free to do their work. So we want to see this election passed as early as possible. We have a question from Julius from Southern 24. You want to know our expenditure pattern in terms of deployment. Now, last year or previous elections, we had an organization called SEDU. SEDU was responsible in terms of civil society organization, in terms of deploying monitors or observers within these elections. They have the expenditures. As members of the coalition, they have their own expenditures because we do not control their budgets from here. So they will be the right people to give you figures. How much did they spend? Right now, we have a new framework for monitoring election domestic called the NEW, the National Election Work. This is new. I'm not sure whether they have received any funding from any source because right now, even the primary elections were monitored or observed on a voluntary basis. But if they have received resources, they will be the right people to give you. As a national coalition, ours is to bring to light the challenges they are facing. The challenges they are facing in terms of the work they are doing while in the field, in terms of the protection and promotion of their rights, but in terms of their financial expenditure. Their secretariats at National Election Watch, which is NGO Forum, would be able to give you the figures that they intend to use or they are going to deploy to observe these forthcoming elections. Any other question or comment? Comments if you want to compliment?
Yes. Thank you so much. This is the last one.
Yes.
So could you also tell us the follow-up on some of the human rights violation cases that we try to do a follow-up on. And then secondly, you could also tell us, there are some people like Africa of recent petitioned the IGP about how she was brutalized to the extent that she lost even the uterus, if I'm not mistaken. So now, how are these people helped? Do you intervene into their issues to make sure that they have justice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Jingo.
Maybe can you give us some, if you have statistics of, in terms of human rights defenders, for a certain period of time, or 1 year, or in the past few years, whose rights have been abused by the state actors, and probably maybe the rest of the people, other than the human rights defenders, the rest of the Ugandans. You have some statistics of human rights defenders in this country that have been abused by state security, and also maybe the rest of the Ugandans.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Mr. Jingo's questions relating to the statistics. You want data. Data, if you want critical data that you can quote, I would invite you to look at the Human Rights Situation Report by the Human Rights Center. I think we have a copy. It gives you statistics within that period, 2019 to date, human rights defenders who have been under attack or threat. And we have a representative here, Farida Chomhadi. She'll be able to give you a report. I think she has a report. We also have a report that gives you clear statistics that you can quote. With regard to other citizens apart from human rights defenders who have been victims of human rights violations or abuses, I'll still invite you to an authoritative report by the Uganda Human Rights Commission report that gives you a situation in terms of how many complaints of human rights nature, whether violations or abuses, that they have. Those two are authoritative reports. One tackles human rights defenders and one tackles the general ordinary citizens. So the Uganda Human Rights Commission report of 2019 would be able to give you that statistics. The Human Situation Report by the Human Rights Center Uganda, that's the organization headed by Mrs. Margaret Sekaja, and their representative is also here, will give you those clear figures. But right now, offhand, I can't give you the actual statistics. In terms of the question, is it from Mr. Byamkama? Julius, Smart 24. Follow up on on human rights defenders cases. Yes, we do. But what constitutes follow-up? It depends on the nature of threat and violation that a human rights defender is facing at that material time. Let's go into the specifics, like the case of Nana. When she had this medical condition, we provided her medical support. What does medical support entail? It means we take her to a doctor that she's confidently able to go to and have her medical attention needs. Two, when matters go beyond and say, look, my threats and attack go beyond just on the street, that even at home, they are coming for me because they know my physical address. Then we do what we call temporary relocation. It means we move you with your family to another place for a period, a minimum period of around 3 months, to ensure that you are able to continue your work as a human rights defender. Third, we provide psychosocial support, which many of you tend to underestimate, that the work you do is risky and you are facing so many things that at the end of the day you will get a mental breakdown. And when you get a mental breakdown, if you don't get early treatment, then you are likely to find yourself at a psychiatric hospital such as a Butabika hospital. And of course we deploy lawyers for them, especially when they need support. When they lose their gadgets like your cameras or your tools of trade, we see how to replace them through our international partners. What I'm trying to say is that we go beyond. Even when the state does not respond, we see how I've told you where the DPP does not act, we ask for private prosecution. So that's the kind of support we provide, or follow-up that we provide to human rights defenders who are under threat.
Just to implement a little bit. Last year we received close to 115 requests for support from human rights defenders here at the coalition. We were able to verify those requests and were able to support 77 human rights defenders. Their requests vary. There were legal requests where these human rights defenders needed legal support. There were requests where human rights defenders needed medical support. And there are also requests where human rights defenders needed psychosocial support. In some extreme circumstances, and especially for your friends from the media, your equipment has been vandalized. So there were human rights defenders and especially journalists that we were able to support last year with levels of equipment. So by way of practical interventions from our point of view, I could say it is a reliable statistic to say that the human rights defenders approach the coalition of various activities. Now, the other question that you asked was in regards to the 8 land rights defenders. Are they still under arrest? What are the practical steps we are putting in place beyond what journalists call lamenting to intervene? Our partners, Kiza and Mugisha advocates, who we work closely with, have initiated private prosecution against the DPC of Kiliandongo. And like my executive director said, we are being facilitated by the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which gives us a platform to go to violators of human rights personally. You see what happened when the Human Rights Enforcement Act was passed? It removed the veil, meaning I can prosecute a DPC, I can file proceedings, civil proceedings against the DPC personally. In this case, we are talking about DPC Bakareke of Kiliandongo. So, as it stands, there is a legal suit initiated by Kiza and Mugisha advocates. But also something that is challenging and really we've been talking about it over time is the continuous abuse of the 48-hour rule. And when it extends to human rights defenders, it has been variously used by police. For example, these 8 rights defenders that we're talking about in Kiliandongo, they were held beyond the 48-hour rule. And at the point of release, you can imagine there was no charge preferred against them. So our continuous engagement in advocacy is to see that really the police respects 2 things. One, the 48-hour rule. If you take in a human rights defender, don't hold them beyond 48 hours. You know. 2, civil rights advocates are continuously engaging in civil prosecution. Why? Because when it comes to human rights defenders, the DPP is not as interested in those matters. So, what are we calling on the DPP? Support private prosecution that is initiated by civil rights advocates. And some of those cases, the coalition has been able to support in one way or another. I also want to compliment the ED on the question you asked about funding. Deploying observers across the country is not a cheap venture. So I hope the media can also illuminate the need for development partners to support us so that we are able to deploy as many human rights observers in the next election process. What the NRM primaries have shown us and what our study, Democracy on Trial, showed us is that chances of violence in the next election are going to be really high, you see. And that, from a human rights perspective, calls for huge deployment of electoral observers. The role of electoral observers is very clear. At the time when these events are happening, and in the age of social media, they are able to bring out these issues. Previously, what happens is we wait until the end of the election and we give a report. But now the dynamics have changed. As and when the circumstance happens, we are able to report. So that's the other issue. The last issue I
would like to do is the accreditation process. In our research, Democracy on Fire, we really identified one major issue, that the Electoral Commission has a cumbersome accreditation process that sometimes leaves out would be useful electoral observers because of the various rules they ask for the accreditation process. So we called onto the Electoral Commission to relax some of those cumbersome accreditation procedures.
Colleagues, based on a question that Mr. Kenneth Bukwavo asked on how we view the scenarios in the coming elections, I want to appeal to you as the media, because you are, besides citizens and human rights defenders as yourself, you are going to be on the firing line. The gadgets you hold are sources of evidence. So you are going to be capturing what for you perceive as news, what others perceive as evidence that can be used to prosecute anybody who will have violated or abused rights. Please prepare yourselves to do what we call a security assessment. I am going to Kawempe to cover a riot, to cover an election that has gone bad. What are those security concerns as a human rights defender who will be carrying out his or her duties to take into consideration? Are you going to position yourself where the demonstrators are, behind the police that is shooting tear gas? We want you alive. And I'm urging you through your associations, whether it's Uganda Journalist Association, whether you have a freelance association, whether you have the Human Rights Network for Journalism, to undertake personal safety and security training. There are many organizations who are our members who are experts in this area, who provide personal safety and security training, who provide digital training. If your phone is taken away from you, does it pose a threat to you? Can someone access all the data and information on your phone? Or he or she cannot access that information. You need that training, and don't take it for granted. Please, you can write, consult the coalition. We shall refer you to our members who are experts in these things. They will train you on your personal safety. How do you do a security assessment? You are going to an area that is volatile. They've already identified the districts that are already volatile. How do you prepare yourself? Say, I'm going to cover this story, but I must make sure that my personal safety is paramount, and I'll get the story, but also be safe and secure to be able to run this story. Please don't take these things for granted. Your gadgets are going to be confiscated if you don't position yourself in such a way that whatever happens, I'll be safe, both at an individual level and also my property will be safe, that I'll be able to run my story. So please take your personal safety and security very key. You had our no lawyer, Nicholas, his phone and the laptop was there, but right now he knows at least where the phone is, because they're able to track in what area. And the place where the phone is likely to be is not an area that you can easily walk in and say, my phone is around here. The data, if it is there and they are able to retrieve it, if it's not encrypted, then you create, you don't only create problems to yourself, but to any other party who gave you information and is within. Please take issues of personal safety and security very serious. Thank you very much.
I want to just say something more. I want to answer the question of the gentleman from the New Vision. He asked that what can make the work of the human rights defenders better. It is in the pipeline that we are thinking about dialogues with the stakeholders in security, especially the leadership of the LDUs. We all know how the LDUs have conducted themselves over the time. So we want our colleagues and stakeholders in security to understand that the human rights defenders are not enemies of the state. We are simply trying to make sure everyone enjoys their rights of being human beings. And then we are also trying to talk to them about the unlawful arrest and detention of the human rights defenders. That is one way of abusing the rights of the others if it can stop, because it has become the habit of the stakeholders in security to just arrest you, whether you are a criminal or not, and detain you immediately, and sometimes you will be in the cells for many days. Edward has just talked about the abuse of the 48-hour rule. And then we are also going to talk, we want to have a dialogue about the freedom of expression and movement of the human rights defenders. Perhaps these dialogues can produce more fruits that can make our work better and can minimize situations of kidnaps, break-ins, and all that. Thank you. She can do it with
Yes, I would like to respond to a question by Jingo, who wanted statistics on the attacks on human rights defenders of 2019. The report is rather detailed, but I'll share with you the report. But we do a broad analysis on even the different attacks. There are different attacks in different forms. It could be and it shows that the notable transition of threats between the two periods. And then it also shows that stigmatization and discrimination, destruction of property, and prevention of meetings, denial of permissions were the more violated rights in 2019. Then we also analyzed who are the attackers. We have to analyze who are the attackers. And there is a wide range of people, culprits, who are likely to attack human rights defenders or violate their rights. And I just want to highlight that overall in 2019, the biggest perpetrators of violations against the HRDs were government officials who are security agencies, communities, and then government officials include RDCs, CAOs, LC5, LDs, and others. They were the biggest perpetrators. The report is rather detailed because it goes on to also analyze which are the rights most violated, because human rights defenders, as they do their work, they have different rights they need to enjoy. They need to enjoy their freedom of opinion and expression. They need to exercise their occupation and profession. They need to access funding. They need to develop and discuss new human rights ideas. They need to access information. They need to access and communicate with international human rights bodies. They need to associate. They need to have peaceful assembly. They need to be protected. And all these rights were analyzed. I can't go in detail, but you can get that in the report.
Thank you very much, Farida. I think we'll bring the...
For instance, ngabo mulaba embeera bwe yali 16 n'okulondebwa kise mulaba namulondola ebintu engeri ebitambulamu
ogenda okulaba embeera y'eddembe ly'abalwanyizi b'eddembe ly'obuntu kuva 2016 eryero olaba nti enkyukakyuka si nyingi wabula nti bigenda byeyongera okuba obubi. Olaba tubadde mu kalulu kakamyufu ng'ate akalulu ka kibiina ekiri mu bufuzi. Ekibiina ekiri mu bufuzi ng'ate kyekirina obuyinza ku magye, kyekirina essente, kyekirina obuyinza ku buli muntu yenna mu ggwanga lino. Olabidde ebintu bino nga bibaawo ng'abantu beekuba emiko nga ssente zeetooloola wonna wonna. Olwo abatali mu kibiina kino bwe banaavugana n'abali abali mu kibuga banaabeerawo bijja kuba bubi. Era kwe kukubira omulanga eri gavumenti balabe engeri gye basobola okuteeka mu nkola basobole okukola nti ebintu bino tebiddamu. Nannyonnyo ekitabo ekyo kye bayita registry. Ekitabo ekyo kirina regisita mwandibadde mulimu abantu bonna abawagizi b'ekibiina ekyo nola nti amannya mwegali oli agenza okulonda bagenda okulaba nti erinnya lye mweriri nebala nti temubaddeemu buvuyo nga bwe tulabye mu madistricts amangi. Kale n'olwekyo tusaba eri abakulembeze b'ebyo ebibiina okulaba nti bataddemu enkola okulaba nti ekitabo ekyo n'ebirala abantu bayombeako babigjeeko nala nti awali awandibadde akavuyo waliwo eddembe nti abantu basobola okukola ki okulonda obulungi ne batalwana.
nabuzize kibuuzo nti etteeka lino mwandyagadde litikate
etteeka lino lye baakasoma omulundi ogumu mu parliament lye twandiise human rights defenders bill twandyagadde okulaba nti parliament eriyisiza maanyi era olumala oluyisa ne pulezidenti aliteekako omukono amangu ago nga tetunagenda mukali akalulu kennyini ketuyita national election abalwanyizi b'eddembe lyondi basobole okukola emirimu gyabwe nga beekakasisa nti balinayo emabega ekintu ekibakuuma. Abakozi ba gavumenti abangi nanyonyo ba RDCs ne ba poliisi tebanakutegeera bulungi ani mulwanyisi w'eddembe ate eddembe eryo alijjawa okulwanira eddembe ly'abalala. Kale tusaba nti singa etteeka eryo baliisa ng'amalala ge bayisa nga lirwayise ne Human Rights Enforcement Act tulaba nti embeera ejja kukyukakyukako abantu basobole okukola abalwanisi b'eddembe ly'obuntu basobole okukola emirimu gyabwe nga tebatya nga temuli kutyogola kubanga etteeka lijja kubaawo ng'oli bwakubuuza nti eddembe olijja nti eri etteeka lino pulezidenti yayisaako omukono parliament yayisa erituwa obuyinza okukola emirimu gyetu. Okuva 2016 ebitongole bya nakyewa nanyonyo ebikolerako ebirwanira eddembe ly'obuntu libadde lirina obuzibu obw'okuyingirira amaofisi gaabwe nga bagamenya oluusi ne bataana abakozi abakuumaawo ne babba ebyuma byabwe ne babba sente ne tuwaaba eri poliisi kubanga etteeka ligamba baba bakubbi oba olina okugenda poliisi n'okola statement poliisi neebuuliriza naye ekituluma nti ekitongole kino kyali netuwandiikira poliisi netugamba musasule sente ezo zetemitwalo 9 netuwandi bunaka titufunanga na ripooti ne gavumenti sente yazitwala.
So I think we've come to the end, but the ED will remain for one-on-one interviews. Thank you very much for participating in this press conference. There is a small refreshment across.